For those who don't know, we're a Christian conservation charity working with individuals and families, churches and Christian land owners and managers to protect and restore nature here in the UK. So while Christians, our programme for individuals and families, exploring the connections between our faith, the natural world and how we live. And if you're not part of that community, we'll give you the sign up link later on. Please get involved. And our campaign takeaways are regular events where we hear from people that are making a difference in their communities, like Tina, and other ones we've had a look in depth at nature-related campaigns and taken a campaign action together. So I'll shortly hand over to our Chief Executive, Andy Atkins, who will be introducing Tina and putting his questions and your questions to her. Tina might have a few questions back for Andy as well. So around 7:45, I'll formally close the event with a prayer, and we've got a few suggested next steps for you. And then we'll do some networking sharing until 8 p.m. So Andy has a track record of campaigning and mobilising the public around environment and development issues with both Christian and secular charities. He was previously CEO of Friends of the Earth in the UK for 7 years, and he also chaired the board of Friends of the Earth Europe. So prior to that, he was advocacy director at Tear Fund, where he established the development charities work on climate change. And he was a founder member of the 2005 Make Poverty History campaign. So he's been our leader and CEO of Rocha UK since 2016. So Andy, welcome. Please unmute your mic if you're not already.
Thank you, Jen. So tonight I'm being a sort of Jon Snow figure. That's the idea. And inviting Tina to speak and then interviewing her. And it's a great pleasure to have Tina here. I think I first remember meeting Tina. I think we were standing in or next to a cabbage patch, which had a giant fracking rig in the corner. We were going, what on earth is that? And what do we do about it? That was up in the corner of Lancashire about 10 years ago or more. So it's a great pleasure to have Tina here, both of us now in kind of new guises. But Tina is somebody who is a real example of somebody who went from being relatively uninvolved, I think, in things environmental locally to ending up being an absolutely key player in a national campaign that was itself key in then stopping fracking in this country. Taking it from having a few interested people to having a few local groups to then having 400 local groups, which then was a major part of leading to the moratorium of fracking in 2019. An incredible story. So we really wanted Tina to be with us tonight to give us an example of local campaigning, but also local campaigning that ends up being incredibly important nationally, and to talk to us about, so what happened, what was that like, what can we learn from it? So with that, Tina, it's a great pleasure to have you. Myself and all of my staff, I know, are delighted to have you with us. Over to you. Give us 15 minutes or so of that, and then I'd love to be asking you some questions and putting some questions from everybody else as well. Thanks.
I can't believe that in this decade since we met that you look exactly the same. It seems very unfair, whereas I look rather weather-beaten considering. Good evening, and I really can't tell you how honoured I am to be here. I love speaking to groups. I love finding where clusters of campaigners are trying to get change in the same way we are, and we find ourselves in all sorts of places and all sorts of types of people. And I think we worked a lot with people of faith. You know, we had No Faith in Fracking Fridays throughout our protests, and it brought together some of the most amazing, determined and admirable people who made such an impact for us. But I suppose I'm going to tell the story of the Nanas, I'd have to go back to where it started, and that would have been in 2011. And I admit that at that point, I had no interest or concern with the environment. I really was just getting on with living life and really enjoying it. You know, I worked in communications, I had a daughter and a granddaughter, and life was okay. And then we'd done the bank bailout, if you remember, in a few years before that. And then I think it was that year that they said they were cutting disability benefits. And it just looked like the government was being just so downright nasty. And I saw that there was the spring, the Arab Spring happening across the world. And then Occupy was coming to London. And I thought, I'm going to go and see, now I'm a grown up and my responsibilities are less, maybe what it's like and what I can do to help. And I went down there and I discovered what activism was, but I couldn't really find my place in it. I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with direct action or anything like that. So, but in between Occupy, I was coming back home to Blackpool, and there was a leaflet through the door saying, this is fantastic new industry coming. Now, keep in mind, Blackpool is the poorest town in England. I mean, there is nowhere worse. It's appalling, and the unemployment, the deprivation. And they said there would be so many jobs. This was natural gas, and it would be so good for our community. And then they started having public meetings. So I went along to one of the frackers' public meetings. They were called Quadrilla. And I worked in marketing for, a few years, and I'd written a few brochures. And when I saw it and heard their words and read their literature, I could spot wriggle room. I couldn't find anything that was a commitment. And when they said, no, it's totally safe, there were a lot of other words wrapped around that made it clear that they weren't committing to that. And when you ask questions at the meetings, they'd say, it wasn't engineers I was asking questions of. They were PR guys, young PR guys who had no knowledge of the industry. So I went off and started doing some research. And one of the saddest pieces of research I found was by the Utah midwives. And it was a big Rolling Stone feature, this cover, and it was devastating and tragic because in Utah, the midwives work independently of the health facility. So they're self-employed, and they found themselves going to a lot more funerals for unborn children, children lost early in pregnancy. And they couldn't understand why that part of the graveyard was just, more full than it should have been. I find it so hard to talk about that. It's a horrible sadness. And, but they were, instead of being listened to, they got gagging orders. So they were told they couldn't speak about this, and legally they were tied in knots and they lost their jobs. And I think it was probably about a year after that the racehorses, the foals, started being born with misaligned jaws and respiratory problems. But they're racehorses, they're worth something, whereas our babies weren't. So that got headline news because they found out that the racehorse breeding places were near fracking sites. They had the issues, but if you were 5 miles further away, you didn't. Then they tied that into what the midwife's story was, and then it started becoming clear that fracking was causing harm. And it causes harm in a multitude of ways. Some are immediate and some are longer term. So the immediate things are there's invisible methane released into the air around a fracking site. They drill through your water course and through your first layer of agriculture, of soil. And when they're drilling through, they use drilling muds, and drilling muds are infused with chemicals. When they finally get down to get to the bit where the gas is, they send a fracture through, and that fracture sends splinters through the shale that are then propped open by little bits of silica sand. Again, working with silica sand, you get silicosis. It's really bad for workers' lungs. And then the gas flows back up, but only half of it comes back up. The other half, and remember, we've sent down a whole lot of water, like for one frac, for instance, you got 4 Olympic pools of water go down with the chemicals, and only 2 of those come back up. And those 2 are filthy and they have to be cleaned, and they will never be returnable to the water table. And what happens to the 2 pools, the 2 swimming pools that are left down is no one really knows. It kind of just wanders about. There was an EU mining waste directive that said that if you're going to frack, if you're going to do any mining industry and it produces liquid waste, it must be monitored over a 30-year period for a 20-mile radius. And there was no one willing to do that. We certainly don't have an environmental agency that's fit for purpose. So all of these things were so worrying. Anyway, so that was me then. I went looking to try and find, anyone in the area. I'd seen what Occupy was. And I thought, well, are there other activists doing this? And I found this lovely little group called Residents Action on Filed Fracking, fracking in the area. But they were an action on because none of us really knew what to expect. No one was against it in the beginning because we didn't know to be against it. But as I said, we'd done some research and we found that. And then I found myself it must have been 2012, it was just crazy because, I was a normal human being who didn't do this much public speaking. And then suddenly I was in the House of Lords giving evidence. They asked for an inquiry. So we went in and that was, probably my last hope bubble that burst in life, maybe, because I thought I'm going to the highest court in the land. This is the House of Lords. when we present what we found, they will stop this. They will. And we went in and it was insulting and dark and rude and misogynistic. And like I was referred to as Tina, everyone else in the room was Mr. or something, or Lord. They were very dismissive, and I think Lord Lawson dozed off partway through. You know, there were various sleeping lords, and yeah, it was tragic. And I realized then very much we're on our own. And then along came Bolcombe. You know, Bolcombe down in Surrey, it got a fracking license before we did. So having been to Occupy, I contacted a few people who'd been there. And I said, we really need to go down and do something. So we had some pre-meetings with the residents groups who were calling for help. And we said, we'll come down and we'll set up camp and we're going to help you stop this. And big and brave and bold promises. Didn't really have a clue what we were doing. But enough of us turned up. And I got to tell you about the most moving moment. You know, like it was really quite an eye-opener in Bolcombe, because it was a very, you know, wealthy, well-to-do area, lots of conservative voters. And the media at the time was saying how much they hated us being there. And to prove that the media was lying, the church got their resident poet to rewrite the words to Jerusalem. And on the Sunday morning, they came as residents down the hill in their hundreds, and the campers walked up the hill, and they were singing this. And it was so moving. And at that point, you knew that you could unify with anybody across any boundaries when you had this shared goal. And it gave me so much faith that for everything that had been burst at the House of Lords or through trying to get things done sensibly, that we actually had this other way. So anyway, moving forward, we then go on to moving up to Salford to another camp. That was horrible. At Barton Moss, it was dark and scary, and media didn't come. And then Upton and other camps that we set up in advance, you know, to try and prevent the frackers, you know, getting onto the land. Obviously, we couldn't do that, but we could delay them and slow them down. And then we realized this wonderful side effect of that was that we were damaging their reputation as well and impacting their share prices. Now, in the end, we know that stopping a truck is not going to stop an industry, but I do know that messing with their share price is going to cripple them and make it hard for them to recover. And that worked very well later at Preston New Road. So in Blackpool, meanwhile, some of the women who'd been going to anti-fracking events together, we were sat down one day in a circle, and Vice were filming a documentary. And after they'd finished filming and walked away, we realized we actually had a group that felt more comfortable with each other and trying to work out our own way of activism that wouldn't necessarily be as aggressive or as brutal, and that we needed to find a way to give women, and particularly older women, a way to have a voice and be heard that wasn't scary. And so we created the Nanas, and 26 of us on the 7th of August 2014 went at 5 o'clock in the morning and threw ourselves over a fence and occupied a field for 3 weeks. Totally unnatural thing to do, and none of these women had done this sort of thing before. We graded ourselves A, B, and C nanas because A nanas could run and they looped off the land with string, and then the B nanas were able to walk along afterwards and hang up like legal notices, and the C nanas generally were helping each other get over that fence, and there were lots of shouts of nan down, and everyone running over to pick nanas up, and then they put the kettle on and made the tea, and we had cake. And then I called the police at 5 in the morning once we were settled, and I said, we've done a civil act, and this is an unoccupied field, we won't be doing any damage, we'll be here for exactly 3 weeks, to alert the people locally as to how close they're going to be to a fracking site. We'd taken the field under the name Operation Mums and Grandmas, but then someone said, oh, look at all those nanas at the gate, it's like Nana Gate, and then we became the Nanas, whether we wanted to or not. And when we'd planned taking this field, there were 26 of us, and we broke into working groups in the weeks before. We had, unlike other activist groups, we had those who'd been working on the tea and catering. We had another group that'd be working out what we'd wear, another group which turned out to be just me, who'd be doing all the press. And yeah, and we did it. And when I called the police at 5 in the morning, they turned up, and much so different from everything else we'd experienced. They got to the gate, and I was standing there. We had these little yellow headscarves on and tabards. And the policeman looked at me and went, "Oh, all right, love. You okay in there? Do you need anything?" I'm like, oh my God, like weeks before I'd been in black and being hurt and brutalized at fracking sites. And then suddenly I'm given a bit of dignity. And then the milkman started delivering in the mornings to us for those 3 weeks. And the neighbors came with ice and joined us for a chat. And it made such an impact. And that was 2014. We didn't actually get the frackers here in that field until 2017. But in the meantime, what we did was we decided we would kind of like Bob Hope in the Vietnam War, maybe, because there wasn't anything fun happening in the fracking movement. It was horrible. So we needed to attract people. That's what every campaign needs. So we got a map of all the license areas, and then we just toured those and gave public meetings. And I called the public meeting in the end the unwelcome gift of truth, and I felt so bad afterwards. I always wanted to cry, because you'd walk into a room full of people who had perfectly happy lives. And now I'm going to tell you that you have a fracking license, your water course is at risk, your air quality is at risk, and you can't really tolerate this because you've got kids. And you're going to have to do something about it. And we can't help. All we can do is give you this unwelcome gift of truth. And then we'd walk away because we couldn't manage them all. But each of those then formed its own little group that was particular to its geographic area. And so you were delivering at a slightly different tone in each area, whether it was, wealthy landowners in North Yorkshire or salt of the earth in Salford. And we were giving a message in Salford once, and Bez from the Happy Mondays was there, and the media were all over him. And he just grabbed me and stuck me in front of him and said, "Everything she says, that's what I agree with." And then afterwards he said to me, "I always feel so like hamstrung because I haven't got the information. Then I think I sound silly." And then that night he went on stage with the Happy Mondays, and he wore an tabard and got more people on side than I could ever. And I said to him, we each have our own audience. And I think we each find our own tribe in this, So we had so many peaks and troughs. 2015, the license for this area came to Lancashire County Council. Hundreds of people gave their own personal testimony at the hearings and so on, and everyone objected. We had Friends of the Earth doing so much for us. I mean, back when Andy was with Friends of the Earth, he made me realize that I wasn't crazy, that it wasn't just some stupid idea that because I didn't think I could, I didn't think I could make any difference. But Andy and Friends of the Earth got behind us and supported us in the beginning, back in 2012, I think that was, and made us realize that we weren't stupid, this was serious, and we did need to act, and that we would have the full support of, people telling us how planning works, how the law works, and even down to organizing our meetings or taking minutes at our meetings, things like that you're not that organized with as a campaigner. So yeah, and then come 2015, we spent a whole week outside the county council, and it was dirty business. It really was. There were people coming up from Westminster, from George Osborne's office, and having side meetings that virtually threaten councillors, that if you say no to fracking, then that financial burden will land on you, the fact that you're going to lose all that money, which of course we wouldn't have done anyway. And we found out this was going on, so we asked the council if they would put out some legal advice we got from Friends of the Earth that made it clear that none of these councillors was individually responsible, and the council refused to do it. So this was when we broke on the Friday, and we were due back in on the Monday for the answer, and we literally hand delivered to every councillor that piece of legal information to their homes, so that they knew they could safely say no. And they did. They said no. And they said no to fracking. And I can't tell you, it was just phenomenal. The saddest bit for me personally being that the night before, I fell over onto stone and broke both wrists. But I was so scared of being caught up in hospital and missing the result, I didn't bother going to hospital till after. So I just kept putting my wrists in ice, and I had socks on them. And then the answer came through, and all you could see in the photographs is me with these strange hands going, don't hug me, my wrists are broken." But yeah, so we won. And then in the April, they had an appeal. They overturned everything. Westminster decided our decision wasn't good enough. And what that did for us was that people who didn't necessarily care about fracking, but did very much care about local democracy, they got really angry that our local council wasn't listened to. So it infused our movement with even more people. And then come 2017, because we didn't win the appeal, you know, they won the appeal, we didn't. 2017 in the January 4th, they arrived. And that was it. We were there for 1,000 days. We did 1,000 days of protest. And that's pretty exhausting, but you find ways to make it less so. You know, there was a uniform manufacturer nearby, and he said, would you like some of my fabric so you can use the ribbons from it? So he used to deliver us sackloads of fabric that was going to go to landfill. We'd shred it into ribbon sizes so that we had something, because they gated off everything. And we started doing artwork and making it pretty and less ugly and less scary, you know, because every day you'd walk up that hill and there it was growing every day, this monster on your horizon. And it was heartbreaking. But we'd walk up the hill anyway, and you go and you tie your ribbons, and a lot of the women locally would bring food and deliver it to the site. People driving by would throw biscuits out and all sorts. We started off with maybe the odd car would beep in support, because we'd have signs up saying beep support. And by the end, you were getting 11 out of 10 cars beeping, because they go up to the roundabout, turn around, come back down and beep again, you know. One guy came up beeping, and the police stopped him and said, that's illegal, you can't beep your horn. And he was so angry, he came back the following week with 100 cars to beep. And, you know, it was life surprises you sometimes. We call him Captain Honking, and he's now moved back up to Scotland, but he was brilliant. But so what did we learn from all this? And because then when we first got there, we were saying, look, there will be earth tremors. You can't do this without earth tremors. And the head of the company was on TV every day going, nah, there'll be nothing. It'll be fine. You're okay. We had 58 earth tremors, 58 seismic events, and every one of them, we were like, well, we were right. And we kept being right. But when we first got to that roadside, I think it was $6 a share for quadrilla shares. And I used to wait till 2 in the morning, because it's on the Australian stock market, 2 in the morning every night, waiting for the share market to open there and open it up to see whether they'd had an effect or if we had. And that was the way it went. It was like yo-yo, you know, sometimes we won and their share price fell, and sometimes they did. But on that site, there were people talking on that share site, the shareholders, saying things like, oh, it's all going so well, the rig's up. And I didn't want to enter into arguments and get trolled, but I would take a photograph, upload it to the site and say, I'm sorry, you're being misled. The rig is not anywhere near complete yet. And started making them begin to doubt the shares that they had, because they were being lied to. And then you'd see a nice drop in the share price. And that was a real joy. I was not very welcome on the site, obviously, but I could still do it. And then I think it was 2018, we got a pause for a while because there were too many tremors, but then they reopened again. And then finally, by November 2019, it all got too much for them. And they closed the site and said there's a moratorium, which is a pause. So as much as we would like a ban on fracking, there's a couple of reasons why we're not necessarily in a hurry for that, because, and Scotland spoke about this, and now Slovenia, is there's a thing called, what's it called? Energy Charter Treaty. So in Slovenia, they said, we're banning fracking. We don't want it. And then we now have British companies suing the Slovenian government because they've lost out on profit. And they can do that through this Energy Charter Treaty. So we don't have laws working for us, protecting us, where we can sue them for killing the future or, you know, for decimating nature, but they have plenty of laws to apply to us. So while there's a moratorium in place, the moratorium states very clearly, of course you can frack as soon as you prove it's safe. And we know it's impossible to prove this is safe. And in Scotland, they said that because fracking is a Westminster decision, they were better off with a moratorium. Otherwise, it'd end up like it did in Lancashire, where you can say, no, we said no to it. and Westminster just overturned your decision. So I've been rambling a lot and I haven't checked the time. So please do stop me if I go on too long.
So why don't you have another closing minute?
Okay.
Because I have loads, and I'm sure the public have loads of questions put to you.
Yeah.
It's
Okay. So
fascinating. I'm sure it's prompted 1,000 questions already. So
yeah. So I suppose what I want to say most about it is the joy of it. You know, it's hard and horrible, and it's stole. I look at my granddaughter, she's 18 now, but she was like 6 when I started this, you know, and she's so tall. And I realized that I didn't really see a lot of that bit. She was with me a lot in the early years, but then she turned into a teenager and kind of went and got on with life. And I realized how much I missed out on with my family. But I also realized how much, you know, I think the one takeaway, I got it. I'm trying to think of what the best one was. And it's that you have to celebrate every win, because it will take a long time to win. And, you know, people used to say, what do you do if you don't win? I thought, well, I can't go home till we do. There is no prospect of losing because I'm going to be in this till we're done. And the wins, every time someone turned up who you'd not seen before and ended up being part of your tribe and stayed there with you and came back time and again, that was a win. You know, there's another heart beating for this cause like mine, you know, and accepting that we didn't really talk about things beyond the fracking. You know, when you get things like Brexit came along, that was a real splinter issue. And if people discussed it, there could be disruption between, you know, the unity. But a lot of people were aware of that. So we didn't. We just talked about what was there and what we were doing and, you know, played some music. Women, God, we danced. I miss the dancing, you know. Generally, you get to an age where you're not clubbing anymore and you have to wait for a christening or a wedding. But for us, we danced whenever we damn well pleased. We danced in the middle of a road, you know, or at the side of a road. And I had the best playlist. It has like 400 songs on it. Yeah. So yeah, so that's kind of it. And so we won, but the earthquakes won, really. Truth won out. That's what it was. Truth won out.
Tina, that's an amazing story. And if that's not written up somewhere, it really needs to be. And we'll come back to that. I mean, it's an amazing personal testimony, but I think it's full of lessons around campaigning. But I just want to stick, if I may, just ask 2 or 3 questions, then hand over to everybody else. Stick with the personal side, if I may, to start with, because you know, I know that you can be absolutely passionate about campaigning, but it can still have a cost. And you've mentioned some of that cost with your family. But I also know you've been trolled, you've been threatened, you've been etc. etc. How do you deal with that? I mean, on a day-to-day basis, how do you deal with that? Because that cannot be easy, despite the motivation to win the campaign.
I think what it is that if we don't keep doing this, if we fail, the harm is so much greater than anything I endure along the way. Oh, you make me feel tearful thinking about it. We can't fail, you know, like in 2016, I faced going to prison. So I actually don't have a criminal record. I've been arrested loads, but I don't have a criminal record. But when we occupied that field, Quadrilla wanted to charge 60 grand for the eviction that never happened. So they said, well, if you don't pay it, then you're in contempt of court. But I couldn't pay it. Not because I couldn't afford it. If it had been 1 penny, I couldn't pay it. How could I give money to the monster, you know, the thing I'm fighting? So I didn't. And I think the hardest part ever was saying goodbye to my granddaughter and my daughter with my bag packed, ready to go to prison. Because I knew I was going. There was no way out of it because I wasn't giving in. And but I wrote a sincere letter to the judge the day before, and he paid attention to it. And so when I got into his court, he said to Quadrilla, whatever you're expecting, that's not happening. This is one woman. She's a grandma. You're not putting that cost on her. And so now I still owe the money, but the judge said she only has to pay if she wins the lottery or inherits land. So I have no wealthy relatives and I don't play the lottery. I'm in the clear. So I'm all right. So, wow. and again, a bit of faith in a judge. So yeah, it's hard as hell. And there are downs, but you can't, you know, how do you stop? I don't know how. So I suppose something kicks in inside that just makes you, oh, well, I'll live for the next dance or the next cake, you know, that'll be fine.
So a question again that we've framed this discussion tonight about local campaigning, and you've gone from like local to lots of locals having a national impact, working with national organizations like Friends of the Earth was, and so on, or is. What lessons do you get from this about who to work with and how to work with them? Because by the end, and it still isn't finished, let's be clear, many of us are on the alert for this getting going again. We've got a moratorium, but that could end, you know, and of course Liz Truss ended it only about 6 months ago, and then Rishi Sunak put it back. So for people who aren't aware, this is a very volatile situation. I think Nanas Against Fracking, the wider movement together, have done a brilliant job in slowing this down, getting a moratorium, but things are fragile. So what lessons do you get from, you know, campaigners or potential campaigners here on this Zoom about working with different groups and the pluses of that and the challenges of that? Because you've had to do it all. You start off as 1 or 2 women locally, you end up working with all sorts of people with different interests and so on. How does that work? Any lessons about doing that?
Staying open, accepting that not everyone's the same, not everyone will approach it in the same way, but everyone has a gift to bring. And they really do. You know, it's like you empty people out when they arrive. And you're like, oh, so why are you here? What's your reason? And how are you going to do that? And then watching people do things with art or do things with the way they write and so on, and learning from all the other groups. I remember there was a day where we had a No Faith in Fracking Day, and there were Buddhists and Christians and Quakers. There was everyone in one space, and they were laughing and smiling and jolly. And I thought, you know what? This is what life really is, because people don't drive wedges between themselves because of the label they're under or the title. People just really want to get to know people and understand it and learn new things. That's just what is in the nature of people, I think. And I think we're led to believe that the world is far more evil than it is. I think the world is 99.9% good. I think that it's just that the bad guys have got the microphone and the sticks, you know? Yeah.
So I can't resist.
I was only going to say working with others is one of the bonuses.
And you've also mentioned not just the different kind of groups you're working with. I was really interested that you were in fact mentioning many different approaches to campaigning. You were talking about communication, the use of the law, the use of the stock market to persuade, you know, and that was really fascinating to me. So it wasn't just one tactic. Now, when you started out, did you have a plan to do that, or did that just kind of develop?
It was really funny as everyone goes, that was an amazing campaign. Well done. Your strategy was brilliant. And I know for a fact, every day was a knee-jerk reaction. That's all it was. You know, every once in a while you'd plan something. We did a 3-month United Resistance where we planned that each group would take a week. You know, so first it was Women's Week, then it was, you know, the Creatives Week, and then it was Bolton had a week, you know, and everyone had a week to do with what they wanted at the gates, but just keep the gates busy. That was the main thing. And we all had a different approach, but we learned a lot from that. You know, there was everything there. And one of the best tactics that really surprised me that I knew nothing about was called, you know, is supply chain. So if my target is this, you know, this bad, dirty fracking company, and they're so big and so powerful and I can't get at them, but I can get to the local cement delivery guy and say to him, so we approached local suppliers and said, look, you can see the community doesn't want this. This is one contract for you. Out of all your other contracts, please withdraw. That was the first communication. And if they didn't, the second communication was, we think you're just like the frackers, and we might come and stop your trucks from leaving the depot before they even get here. At which point, even Eddie Stobar as a company said, we will not supply the frackers because they're scared of reputation. And so sometimes you can dig in different ways, and it's quite cunning, but you know, none of us knew that. None of these things come to you naturally. You have to bump into someone else who shares their knowledge, you know, and everyone was willing to share their knowledge. You know, Reclaim the Power was a group, and they were incredible. I mean, they bring sticks and they sit on top of things, and then people jump on trucks, and there were people who jumped on trucks and hijacked them for 3 days. You're just sitting on the top of the roof so that the truck couldn't go or come and block the road. You know, we didn't block the road for the users, but it blocked it for, you know, fracking traffic. And, you know, it's like when you look at what happened, like yesterday, for instance, with Just Stop Oil, You know, sometimes some things happen in activism that make us all look bad, but we're not all one group. And, you know, I kind of get what they're doing. I don't agree that we would ever do stuff like that, because to me, keeping the public on side is important. But if you're going to throw soup at a Van Gogh or powder on a snooker table, I always think of Just Stop Oil as a bit like, you know, the angry youngsters. And they have every right to be angry. We stole their future. And they've caused a conversation that says, oh, right, okay, so you think this picture or this snooker table is so damned important. And that's what it provokes. I don't agree with their method, but nor would I slander them for it, because I get what they're doing. I get that rage and that urgency. And sometimes if you're not skilled at activism, which none of us are to start with, then you just lash out and do what you do, you know? So yeah, it's and it can be divisive at times. And, you know, not all groups appreciate, like we used to get loads of hassle and be getting like, oh, just those stupid nanas and their knitting. And you're like, yeah, we were knitting ourselves into a ball, mate. You didn't see that we had woolly handcuffs and all our wool was woven into our chairs. And by the time we finished knitting, no one could move us because we completely blockaded the gates in a woolly mass. And they had to send 50 Lancashire cops to break us up. And it was the one time we got a Daily Mail headline that said 50 Lancashire cops bear down on 18 knitting OAPs. We're like, yes, that was the headline we wanted. And then we had all the young people saying to us, we'll stop them, we won't let them hurt you. And I'm like, no, go away. You have to let them. We have to show how far they're willing to go for profit, that they're willing to use our police force against 18 knitting ladies who are doing no harm other than being a bit in the way and a bit of a nuisance. But there was one, I wrapped the wool as they were coming to me. I'm wrapping the wool around my neck thinking, no, I'm not going to get off my seat. But the lady next door got dragged off hers, and that then began to choke me because we were woven into each other. And then he turned up with some secateurs and cut there. But that was the photo too. So again, it looks like some cop slitting the throat of some nice nana. And, you know, these things, you're learning to play their marketing games, a hard one, because it's uncomfortable. You don't necessarily want to play anything stupid. It's too serious. But, you know, you find out where you're going as you go along. Yeah.
No, I called you Nana.
Tina. I love that. I love it.
Tina. So one last question for me, and I want to end my little questions on the note of fun, because you've mentioned, and what you've just referred to another example. And I was going to ask you this question anyway. In my own experience, it is often the fun aspects that not just keep you going, but attract the public, because often the environmental community is talking about doom and gloom, and they think we're all killjoys and we want to stop everybody having fun. Just say a little bit more about that, the fun as a tactic.
Yeah, I think my sister was the one who started the whole like smile and wave, you know? When you're there with an angry sign and an angry face and you're angry with the government, why would, you know, we're all pressed as people in our lives, you know, and to take time out then to go and hang out with the angry people is not really a life choice anyone wants to make. But if instead just smiling and waving, people really engage back, and then suddenly they're a little bit invested in you and they think you're quite nice. And if you're quite nice, what's that message you're bringing? Maybe what you're talking about really matters, you know? And I remember there was a night Emma Thompson and I have done a couple of actions together, and she's an amazing woman and we stay in touch. She's incredible. She's such a good activist. Anyway, she was coming down one morning, and she said to me, I'll be there in the morning, anything I need to know. And I said this the night before. I was like, oh no, we've learned this dance. It's called Million Women Rising, and it's quite complicated, but have a quick look and see if you can fit in. Oh my goodness. She turned up. She knew every step. And it was just such a laugh. And there was like 50 women doing this dance and we looked so good at it. And I said to her afterwards, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. And she said, I think you forget I'm an actress. I have to learn to fence and ride horses. And you sending me choreography the night before gives me more than enough time to work it out. So she did. And she's an honorary nana. And so was Vivienne Westwood. She was an honorary nana. And I was invited to the memorial in London. And I went along to that, and one of the first things that was said, I think it was the head of Greenpeace, he was reading his piece and he was talking about his last conversation with her and how proud she was that she'd been an honorary nana. And we have a picture of her in a tabard just beaming, and she came up and she did Dancing Queen with us at the side of the road. These things are important. But again, hardline activists will tell you, oh, don't mess with celebrities. What's the point in that? But, well, you know, maybe not in your activism, but in my activism, yeah. You know, so do it your way. Don't be dictated to, or think that if that looks like the norm, there is no norm in activism. It is what you make it, you know?
Yeah. This is lovely, and I'm again, you know, you're the star here, not me, but it so accords with my own experience, you know, which is now, you know, several decades, and that you learn as you go. You often start there were no degrees in campaigning or activism. We just had to make it up, and I hope that's an encouragement to others here. There is now a lot of experience out there in the Christian community and beyond. Particularly beyond, actually, of effective activism that we can draw on. We don't need to recreate the wheel, but there will always be an element, as you've said, Tina, of responding to what happens and figuring out as you go. And I think there are, you know, I know people go, well, I don't see myself as an activist, but I look at them and look at what they're doing, going, looks like activism to me. It's
Absolutely.
just they think they need to look like somebody else.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's
I talked about it mainly from the physicality of it, but what I haven't mentioned that I really must are the behind the scenes and people who couldn't be with us physically. There was a multitude of reasons why a lot of people can't be with you, but what they do behind the scenes with sharing your message and even just sending you the odd message of saying, watched you today, thanks so much, that was amazing. And you just felt, you know, if even one person who can't make it tells you they're glad that you're there, you become two people.
Yeah.
You then think, I can't go home because she can't get here. So now I've got to be here for both of us. And then I started once, I was going down to a protest in London, and I said, oh, listen, if you can't make it, give me your name. I'll write it on, I was going to wear a sheet. I'll write it on the sheet. Well, 4 in the morning and I'm still writing. I've run out of sheet. I'm all over my sister's sheet by this time. And then in the end, we realized like each one of us represented so many people who couldn't be there, but they needed to know they were heard. And I think that whenever you have a down day, you remember those who don't have the opportunity to go and physically do something. And that really matters.
Pete Louise, thank you so much.